Oh, oh, hey, it's Alex. We're gonna be doing another I believe it's AJH Radio for the Earth broadcast. So we're gonna be talking about different kinds of things in regards to the spiritual and the spirit realm, and basically some of the stuff that's happening this month, and basically talk about some of the it's not just about disparities. This recording and this broadcast, this content, it has to do with many different topics in regards to the spiritual. Some of which has to do with learning and understanding what exactly is happening around us in the spirit, and ways to be able to coexist in a certain kind of sense. But it's also to talk about different kinds of psychic activity and different experiences and things of that nature. One of the things that I wanted to talk about on this broadcast had to do with different kinds of body creation, different kinds of atmospherics. Upon the content that we consume, that we watch, there is multiple kinds of experiences that we are experiencing in any given moment to be true. Incarnation to other kinds of experiences as well, other dimensional selves experiencing different kinds of life while we consume content and things of that nature. I mean, I've watched multiple kinds of movies, read books, listened to music, did, series, video games, all different kinds of things. And the interaction that I experience as a psychic lets me know that there is for some of it, there is a certain kind that is sometimes considered to be buffer in a certain manner. That sort of thing that says that if there is a certain kind of turbulence that takes place or conflict, for some of them, that there is a certain kind of buffer in regards to interaction. But some of it doesn't necessarily have to do with conflict. Some of it has to do with experiences. Some of it has to do with life, has to do with positivity. Energies and other kind of facilitations too. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to do with violence and conflict to a certain extent, but rather maybe facilitating a certain kind of interaction in a certain way. So, for example, if we put on a movie and there is a dimensional existence that is involved in regards to the filming of that movie, having certain kinds of dimensional buffer in regards to interaction can be close. Now, I know some people don't like me going straight to the violence portion of it, and some people might be like, violence? What do you mean? Well, if there is certain kind of spiritual societies, negative spirits at times, immorality promotion in regards to certain overlapping societal and that sort of thing, and I have been able to discern it, and it has been a part of my process in regards to discerning that and understanding it to a certain extent. It can seem that sort of portion is talked about and let know in a certain kind of manner. So again, imagine putting on a certain kind of violent content, and imagine that there is a certain society that likes that violent content, but there's also other kinds of attachments in regards to it to facilitate a certain kind of violence in a certain kind of way. There might be certain society that like to experience a certain kind of violence and immorality in a certain kind of way, like where it's every day, where it's normal. You have lower plane culture in certain light that promote violence and that sort of stuff daily, and there's some who look upon it and look at it as a large amount of fighting. But I think that there is certain kinds of creed and direction in regards to some of it, even though it can look chaotic at times, some of which may be for a reason and some of which not. But either way, if that sort of culture exists around us, then you can imagine that when we talk about buffer dimensional existences and things of that nature, that would be one of the topics of discussion that's talked about a lot. But taking that aside and talking about something else, what about facilitating certain kinds of interaction when people are busy? You have a dimensional who's involved in a lot of different productions and things like that, and to protect time in a certain kind of manner, to facilitate different kinds of leeway and things of that nature. There is a certain kind of interaction that can take place in a certain manner where for some of it he might be that dimensional might be able to experience it, and by way of reference in regards to he in this instance, it's not necessarily a reference in regards to gender, but rather spirit, etc. to find spirit guides. There is a certain kind of interaction that can potentially take place which can help, those who are experiencing certain kind of content. And you can imagine that if one of the dimensionals ended up having billions and trillions and even more spirits around them by way of some of the content that people consume, that the fame levels and heightening and acceleration would be too much. It'd be too, I think it would be too much. So there is that facilitation of dimensional existences where there's, bodies and atmospheric forms and things of that nature to be able to facilitate that process in multiple kinds of ways. And it sort of knocks on the door of the famous. If there is hundreds of thousands of spirits around just regular folk, that sort of thing, then what does that mean about the famous? Is it millions, billions, more than that? Some look towards the some of the true numbers of it, and some of them are really heightened, and there is extremes to a certain extent. But there is that sort of stuff where, I feel that there is a facilitation in regards to that fame in multiple kinds of ways. And there is, for some, cracks where there is certain spirits at times that have been getting through in certain areas. And it does have potentially more to do with something else at play than rather the defense itself. I mean, this is the truth of this. I feel like there is a certain amount of other things going on in higher dimensional, in other dimensional existences where, a certain decision is made or a certain action happens, where then it's like we have to make a decision here to let certain spirits get through in a certain manner regarding some of them. But that's not all of it. Some of it has to do with resources and things of that nature. So upon that sort of interaction and the resources being met to a certain degree in regards to those, those safeties and safety nets in regards to those, that means spirit guides indicated being situated and protected daily, maintained, maintenance being a huge one in regards to this, that sort of thing, where we got bodies, atmospherics, and other kinds being facilitated, literal, potentially dimensional existences, and being able to maintain that from afar is needed, and speaks of some of the rights issues that some of this broadcast talks about to a certain extent. So if there is that sort of thing, we put on a movie, and all of a sudden, there's other dimensional selves that you're given a choice to be able to experience certain kind of life within that movie. Some of the dimensional selves, pass and decide to do something else, but some of them say, hey, maybe I want to live a life as one of the, famous characters within art and fiction worlds and things like that. So all of a sudden, you potentially have an experience under your belt in regards to some of those stories depicted within within some of the films, some of the character lives and things like that, where that potentially affects you later on. It might also affect other kinds of machinisms, our perception, how we feel about film, how we feel about certain actors, certain characters to a certain extent, form, likes, dislikes, all that sort of stuff, qualities and traits in regards to ourselves being affected by way of the experiences that we have, and potentially the experiences that we don't have to a certain extent, because God forbid we have a experience that we don't have, that we don't forget about it, because but with that sort of thing, I feel that there's also a certain facilitation that could be decent in regards to some of the interaction that we have. Now, of course, I think we want to be careful in regards to how we proceed in regards to content, in regards to content that's created in regards to certain areas. It's not just in regards to Earth, it's also in regards to other planets and other areas, other dimensions, non-dimensional, things of that nature that spirit guides indicated, and, how we approach certain situations. We might not necessarily see it at a certain line as to why it is we just can't have whatever the heck we need, but then higher up, it's like, that's why, this is the reason, but we don't want to say too much on it because that's also it. You got a bunch of different lines to maintain, that sort of thing that says future, past, present, different kinds of diplomacy, culture, a society, gods, which can be a part of society in the ways you guys indicated, a bunch of other things too that these leaders are trying to deal with and juggle. I mean, there was something I said in one of my mass regression issue discussions, which had to do with the idea that if some of the generals on this physical planet Earth were given information as to what some of the other dimensional generals had to deal with. And not to say that the physical generals, I mean, spirit guides didn't have to deal with this sort of stuff in other dimensional and that sort of thing, because I think that at times they did. But I said a metaphor and it kind of hit home in a certain kind of way. And it would be like one of those things where it's like a certain battlefield doesn't just have to be aware of what's happening on one side of the conflict and the other. As well, specifically, throwing into the mix the other variables that we're not fully aware of. What kind of variables are you talking about? Well, if you got a bunch of tanks, jeeps, and uniforms, gear, ammunition, food items, that sort of resource list and the industries and recreational regarding it, you can see how in certain culture, certain conglomerates, factions emerge in regards to some of these companies and recreational in a certain manner. You can see if there was two sides to a battle and they start warring, and all of a sudden in the other dimensional, though, you have certain groups of those industries and recreational in the mix in certain battles by way of name recognition and brand being on multiple things, on the jeeps themselves, on the tanks themselves. All of a sudden you have another sort of variable to deal with. And some people are like, yeah, but you're not going to see certain physicals from GM just show up on the battlefield in certain places for what's acceptable. You never know if there was moments like that on this physical planet Earth to a certain extent. But in the other dimensional, some of them, there is moments where that might have happened. So all of a sudden you have another variable they have to worry about on either side. Juggling industry and recreation in a literal faction sort of way. But then you start putting the other variables in the mix. If there are certain generals of a certain faith, trying to maintain that sort of aspect of certain things, not to mention the other concepts. Earth itself is potentially a living being. So, in these battles, you have, some of them, you have Earth kind of, doing his thing to a certain extent. But not only that, but there's also other things as well in regards to setting itself. There's a physical component of it too, which might be the one of the bigs. You think about this physical universe to a certain extent, and there is certain battles, and potentially not necessarily. Well, I don't know if it's on this planet Earth, but there is battles where I think that spirit has been present, and I'm not. It's difficult to say because I don't want to heighten that line and say that he was there in certain Earth battles when he might not have been for what's acceptable. Because some people say he was there either way in a certain manner. Exactly. There is that sort of perception, specifically we start to talk about, awareness in regards to certain setting and things of that nature. So, I mean, that's some of the variables. But then you start to factor in that there's potentially hundreds and thousands of dimensional layerings that are happening, and that one bullet fired potentially affects multiple places, and some which can move out of the way in time in regards to some of that, the time differences, but some of them don't. So, the kind of, those who maintain to be able to have battles, thank you, good sirs, for doing that in a certain manner, because I can't imagine what it would look like in a certain sense if we had to deal with the expanded variables that Main Spirit Guides indicated. So I and others from Main Spirit Guides are advocating for the resources that Main Spirit Guides indicate in regards to this marketing application, etc. to Main Spirit Guides to go towards those that Main Spirit Guides indicate in regards to this marketing application, etc. to Main Spirit Guides. With that being said, that's some of the outline in regards to why it is in regards to certain interaction. Why there's sometimes a lot of logistics and manpower in regards to it, which kind of segues towards the interaction portion of experiencing content, experiencing film, and specifically if we're experiencing certain lives in regards to some of those films. You would talk about some of the war films and things like that. What exactly does that entail for some of them, and what do the lines look like, and what do we want it to be? And how are we able to facilitate those lines? Because there's a lot of people who say, like, yeah, we just like this, this right here. That's all it is. So with that being said, and this is the thing of it, this is the truth. So here you go. Here it is. There you go. You feel better? With that being said, I think it can be something that we need to be understanding about to a certain extent. And in going from A to B in regards to facilitating regarding some of the stuff that the Main Spirit Guides indicated, we need to actually have a viability in regards to going towards some of it, but also um, understanding. And again, if the quality of, like, the difficulty is in quality of life that some want is not achievable, then where do we go from there? Because there is it warfare? Is it battle? Is it peace talks? I mean, what do we go to war and then label it peace? I mean, is that what we do? If we're like, oh, I just want to throw that in there. Well, so I mean, I think that it's something worth talking about, and specifically in regards to viability and why it is viable. So if it becomes not viable, understanding the reasonings as to why that is, so that we can figure out how to change some of those variables in a certain way. And again, there is that sort of thing where it's like we start going the direction, and how much time do we have to do that, to go around all this red tape, to go around all that way, to go the way of viability, and then when it's thrown, on the table, saying that all this time, utilized in regards to going around and red tape and all this sort of stuff, what do we say to that when they throw it in the air that, hey, we went the long way around? Specifically when it's thrown up that, the amount of time that we took to go the long way around, sorry, not the long way around, the middle of the road approach, or the road that we took that main spirit guides indicated, and then there's this large chunk of damage in regards to certain approaches and direction. Not to say that that wouldn't have been in regards to a straight up conflict, getting it done right then and there for what's acceptable. Just to say that how it is that we deal with those lines to a certain extent. So as a psychic medium, one of the things I've noticed is an interaction in regards to some of the characters pertaining to the content itself. I'll throw in a movie, and it's not just in regards to characters though. It's also in regards to certain actors to a certain extent. This is the truth. It's a mixed bag to a certain degree, and it's one of those ones where I'm adding for the truth. That means spirit guys need to be displayed. Where guys need in regards to what means spirit guys need to get, guys need, but it's also has to do with it. Well, it has to do with I think a certain kind of utilization in regards to characters at times, as well as certain actors, forms, etc. In regards to that, guys, and it's not just actors though; it could be multiple kinds. To a certain extent, fame is the better, I think, way of saying it to a certain extent. So and when you get to a certain kind, that's where people get uncomfortable. There is ones in regards to certain kind of music at times. There's a certain kind in regards to it, but we talk about Hollywood, we talk about cinema, and that one's a big one. That's a big one where when we see it, there's already this sort of a little bit of an understanding and a bit of a disparity in regards to it, that it's somewhat close to be able to, for some to interact with those forms. I mean, you talk about one of those things that just kind of did it. It doesn't have to, and for some it didn't, but for others it kind of felt like it kind of went by the wayside in regards to that sort of thing that says, hey, I want my form to be utilized in this certain kind of fashion. I am one of those who looks at form utilization in a fairly liberal way that the main spirit guides indicated, but it's kind of unfair for some because I have been in situations where some would say, okay, well, that might be why. That might be why. And it's not that kind. That some make it something to be it's not, but there is something there. And I also look at certain issues and I say, well, if we can facilitate ways of life by way of certain spirits of immorality and spirit that promote immorality, being able to get their kicks in certain violent video games, with that sort of difficulty and issue to a certain extent in regards to form utilization, atmospherics, things of that nature, setting. It's not just that. You talk about Earth. Earth probably got a bone to pick with somebody. This is the case of this. There's got to be something said there. And I know people have been saying that, like, oh, Earth, like that. Is that what it is? Is that really what it's going to be? It's a trap, good sir. Because I'm fairly certain. It doesn't even have to have had happened yesterday. Alrighty then. Well, okay, then that was the case. But I also discerned something yesterday in regards to Earth, early morning, actually today, and it had to do with something that was happening with the wind, something that was happening with Earth, and I didn't know if there was going to be a follow up in regards to water and fire to a certain extent, certain elements, something happening with it spiritually. There was something already that had happened, I think, in regards to water, quite fairly. That might have been that one. I don't know. Maybe to some of it. I don't know. There was a certain thing that happened, and I kind of discerned that Earth was a little upset, but I think that some of it might have been feng shuied. Some of it's being feng shuied to make them look upset, where, certain spirit come by, try and situate certain things. But that was also, I think, in counter of some of the things that just got, kind of feng shuied a certain way in a decent line that some looked at, said, okay, it may not be as decent as what we wanted to a certain extent for some, because some it might have been as much as decent as they wanted. But there was this line where it was like, we had seen this on my end, at least seemingly, on my end in a certain manner. It was usually, a little bit more than that, a little bit more brimstone, a little bit less appealing to a certain extent. So some of the decence in regards to that, again, that recollection kind of feng shui where it's like, again, I'll say this one because it's a decent one. It's that sort of thing where, two people fight and then it's like, later on, it's like, oh, remember that fight? Oh, well, that was just a misunderstanding, and but that being potentially, a little bit more than just a misunderstanding, and that sort of thing that when does that encroach upon the lines of, what we find to be acceptable, and at what point do you see it from someone else's situations? It really is one of those ones where if you're in their spot to a certain extent, would you want it to be done that way? But at the same time, you look at some of the banner lines, you're like, yeah, but it can situate a whole bunch of things. This is the thing of it, and it's just like it's still, there's still something there, and it's like I've seen it from multiple angles in regards to it. How do you take a steady line in regards to that sort of thing and still be fair in regards to either side? And it's a good question. This is open channeling spirit, and there's multiple kinds of capacities to go. This is the case of this. I hear you. I thank you for the information. There is behind the scenes information at times in which exists. Other dimensional might be seeing entire paragraphs of wordings within two let knows, sentences and things of that nature. Well, that would be why. Yeah, well, that's the thing of it, though. All right, that would be why. Yeah, well, let's make certain that's the why. All right, well, why you don't get that to say, though. You guys have streamlined it to such a degree on my end that it looks no, it does not look hunky dory. At times in my process, there's been interaction where it's been like there's like this large amount of morality, and then like 2-3 hours later, it's just a complete and utter opposite, seemingly. But not only that, but we go a certain route, and then it just something doesn't work out, and then everything switches up. I make two content, then we try something, and then we create another content, and then it's going the other way again. But then when it's said to be that in a certain degree, in a certain manner, this would be one of those instances where it's like, yeah, but it's not as bad as it seems, and it can situate a bunch of things. What is that situating a bunch of things doing, though? I mean, what is that lending towards, really? Because there is times where people have continued to say, yeah, well, this still exists. This is still happening. And, of course, a bunch of other people saying that this still doesn't exist. This still doesn't happen. And it does knock on the lines of that sort of stuff that's sort of deployed at times to say, hey, you've impacted change and that sort of stuff, which is decent because it sometimes also does impact change. I agree with both. I like multiple tactics. It's just at times when there's those heavy ones where it's like you seemingly didn't really impact anything at all. Like 90%, 90 some odd percent of something that was just something deployed there to just clean up. For some, it is disconcerting and upsetting, specifically if there is these sort of conflicts taking place behind the scenes in the spirit realm. Again, context regarding it is greatly appreciated to a certain extent. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things in the spirit where we're still, I think some are trying to still figure out which way to go by way of different kinds of areas. Again, you take a look at physical earth-based, and there is that sort of thing where it's like we're still learning, we're still understanding. So it's not that unclothed to understand, I feel, to a certain extent, that there would still need be that understanding regarding some of them within other dimensional, to a certain extent. I think that those sort of society does exist where there's a planet that is emerging and there is peoples on it, and there might be that outer space kind of feeling in regards to some other dimensional, in regards to what's attached to Earth, other planets, things of that nature. um, yeah, I mean that's some of it, but the idea to be able to um, utilize different kinds of process alternatives. That's one of them. I mean, there's been some turbulence in this process where at times I think there has been utilization of process alternatives from afar. That sort of thing that says where it's like a certain kind of place is set up to look like Alex in a certain kind of manner, or to facilitate certain abilities or power level, etc. To for guides from Alex, for myself, in certain ways, and that says that there is, I think that sort of stuff that exists to a certain extent. But I've also had interaction tells and proves, as well as regular normalities where I look at people to a certain extent in society and say there has to be a certain kind of buffer to a certain extent. Not only that, but the confirmations in regards to the different kinds of communications, things like that. My psychic communications knows that sort of thing exists. My own experiences and interaction lending towards that there is those sort of existences where there is different kinds of utilization in regards to character, setting I think should be said, because it is, setting, there's ones like that. This is it. I mean, that would be one of Earth. I mean, for some people could say Earth to be character as well too. So it's one of those things that can, I think, go back and forth for some of them. How is it? How isn't it? How is that the case of it, eh? Well, that was the thing of it. Remember that. Well, that is amazing. There was a film that I had watched. I think it was called "The Man from Earth," and the idea is that that maybe there's some theories that say that he was telling the truth. I do like that one, but there was other ones that also said that he might have been lying, but that there was a spirit from a certain kind that upon maybe walking on Earth with your shoes, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, a spirit from Earth sort of channeled through him at times, speaking of the past. The idea was that it was, he was a caveman that did not pass on, that he continued living. He was considered like a shaman in early days and things like that. And he basically, sat around a fire in his house, small setting, or seemingly small setting, but really, what main spirit guides indicated, like our light setting that main spirit guides needed, like display what main spirit guides needed regarding the main spirit guides needed. I go to the spirit sometimes. I go to, the light, setting that main spirit guides indicated. You think about the light near death experience research. You think about different kinds of other ones too. There might be a spirit in regards to the physical. I think that there very much is, to a certain degree. And you can potentially do advocations in regards to them, and certain things potentially shift behind the scenes in a certain manner. And different frameworks in regards to different eras. One of the things that that I think has been utilized to a certain degree in regards to film and content is certain systems that were around in the past, specific to the time era that's being depicted. So you think about like a 1940s film and that sort of thing. You talk about different kind of 1940s kind of vibes, feelings. You kind of get that kind of, I kind of get like a fedora feeling, kind of jazz club kind of feeling. I don't know if jazz club might be like 20s, I think. Well, 1940s though, you get that suit, you get like respect. There's a respect in regards to women. There's a well-mannered, a way of speaking. There's an air about them that is impressive. And I think that there is systems that facilitated that during wartime, but also not so. Also, well, it was also earlier, which I think some of it carried on into the 50s to a certain extent, in a certain manner, maybe early 50s to a certain extent, maybe 1950, maybe that sort of thing. I think that might have been included, and potentially more years than that in the ways that main spirit guides indicated. But either way, if those systems, of energies that you feel, of spiritual systems behind the scenes, imagine entire deployment of different rooms and different interaction, different kinds of fashion, different kinds of forms, ways of speaking, qualities, traits, things like that, that were deployed at one time, but then also changed. And there's some of it that changes, I think, with it, which is then the next era. I think the 50s was that sunshine kind of golden era kind of thing, which went from the 1940s had this kind of nighttime dark kind of feeling to me. I kind of get like a nighttime dark feeling from it. So I mean, I think that that's part of the switching up of certain systems to a certain extent. Um, but I still think it shouldn't be. I think it should still include some of the years in the 50s that Main Spirit Guides indicated. Also, partially by way of evolving some of the systems that Main Spirit Guides indicated, the way Main Spirit Guides needed, but some of the systems not to, in the manners that Main Spirit Guides indicated. Regardless, I think that they would deploy some of those systems in regards to some of the Hollywood movies and things of that nature. And there's also recreations, stuff like that. And it really is fascinating to see, especially in regards to the bodies, the body atmospherics, and formulation in regards to physicals and others. You talk about dimensional bodies being created, in certain manners. Again, there's this concept that in certain places you can create a body. Imagine jumping in the body and then just living your life. And imagine that for some, when you're in the body, you remember how you jumped into that body. It's not just birth and growing up. You don't, earlier memories for some of us on this physical planet that, we have difficulty remembering when we're a baby, that sort of thing. But there's also other kinds too. There is a big feng shui happening on this planet to a certain extent. But what I wanted to talk about, I think so. I think to a certain extent, in a certain kind of way. But the truth remains where it's indicated, the way it's indicated. You can't fight what's been happening at times. And we've been this road a couple different times. And what's it been? So, in understanding what those in the past are saying regarding it, understanding what went down and what happened, is a part of it. To be able to reflect and recollect in regards to some of those who are saying that, oh, well, certain events are not necessarily as bad as they seem, and let's just move on and things will get better. Certain people can get back into their position. Imagine, to be frank, it's one of those things where imagine. Somebody, well, for some, let's say, let's use a utilization of an example here. Let's say that there's two people that fight, and someone says something that they didn't mean, says something, really horrible and really bad. And upon recollection, they move on with their friendship and say, you know what? Let's just forget about it. Let's not talk about it. But it's still something that exists to a certain extent for what's acceptable. Some, in certain other dimensional, there is that sort of thing which says that some of it doesn't have to exist in a certain way. They can feng shui it a certain kind of fashion. All right, well, that is correct. But that sort of thing that says we need to still be able to reflect in regards to our friendship to a certain extent and say that, hey, I mean, if this happens more and more and more continues to happen upon that sort of stuff, to say, hey, let's just forget about it. Hey, let's just forget about it. Hey, let's just forget about it. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on, well, fool me 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, what's it going to be? And I do believe in unlimited chances in the ways it means, guys. I should always believe in that. That's what it should always be. But it's difficult to say that in certain situations. When there's things happening, when lives are at stake, when death is at stake, a bunch of different things. Geez, talk about feng shui. Oh, let me be correct. I'm advocating for feng shui to be protected when you guys need it, but it's not just feng shui. It's also a certain kind of cleaner, that sort of thing too. Someone comes in, makes it look a certain kind of way, but people can also benefit from it. And the idea is that certain conflicts arise, and those conflicts were fairly bad. But imagine that a certain kind of recollection, reflecting something that helps with that friendship moving forward. But again, we need to be able to understand, is that going to happen again in the future in regards to certain things? Is it going to be something else? I mean, this might be a part of it. Hey, it might be. You never know. I mean, this is also it. Well, that is because there is something in play currently, and it's been in play for some people. Some people said, 10, 20 years way back when. Some people said hundreds of years way back when. Some people said thousands of years way back when. Some people have said probably potentially more than that way back when. What that means for guides indicated. But there is those ones where I've said it, last month in, well, no, it was in May. I think it was in May, end of May, 2019 that, fine, let's see what the year looks like. I did. I have said that. I'll give them a year, and that's the true. Because it's felt like they, that way on my end, where it's been this sort of thing where it's like I've had times where, certain defensive spirits at times in regards to certain things have taken a certain line where all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, if you take that line, then I'm going to attack you. And posing as not just posing as my defense, literally defending me in certain manners, going to a different switch. And then partially utilized is that sort of thing that says, hey, but it was helping, one of those things to say that we were, it would help to get along by way of associating, by way of watching spirits defend you, who then you can, heal your friendship or that lens towards getting along specifically within the confines of warfare and that sort of thing that says we can live decent life in other dimensional. That sort of lens towards getting along and says, hey, when we pass on and go to those places and we take a look at what happened in other dimensional, specifically in regards to the conflict, because this doesn't always pertain to regular folk. Right? Well, that needs to be understood. And me saying it in a content video shouldn't have caused happen. And it's not good enough. It can't be a decent enough line. People of a certain realistic look at it and say, listen, this is not clout. In just talking about some of that stuff to a certain extent, and some people say that, just talking about it's not good, but that's also it. I'm in a certain society that Mean Spirit Guides indicated, and I want to be placed where Mean Spirit Guides indicated. So, that's one of those things, that it's one of those disagreements to a certain extent, because somebody got angry. That's what that is. It seems to be. Well, that's what you did. So, some of the talk, these days has been about that sort of facilitation of decent interaction, facilitation of morality promotion. And, some of it has had to do with what is the ripple effect and impact in regards to those that were utilizing, certain negatives within processes, within behavior, personality, those changing, and what the heck is happening to them by way of not being able to utilize, certain negatives. How are they thriving? And there's some people who just, go way past and say, you just need to drop some of them. And this is the case of this. Some of them, that is the true. And I do believe it in many different chances, but it's difficult when you can see the motivation, when you can see the intent. So you can see that there is those in the light looking upon it saying, hey, but these guys some of them are sharks in the worst manner. And where there's some of them are knowing like they're trying to harm you. And some of them are decent sharks where they do like this. Some of them will bite. Well, that is the case of it. Sharks are decent creatures. So I'm adding for the utilization of sharks that Mean Spirit Guides indicated pertaining to metaphorical that Mean Spirit Guides negated in regards to those that Mean Spirit Guides negated to be what Mean Spirit Guides negated, the way Mean Spirit Guides negated. And at least in that manner, I'm still trying to get that positive ripple effect. They're scary creatures, but they are majestic. And they don't deserve to get harmed. I really appreciate those on this physical planet who are trying to situate shark hunting to a certain extent. Really decent work. And I'm asking for those that Mean Spirit Guides need to be protected. The Mean Spirit Guides indicated. Well, that's what you went with, though. That is what you went with. All right, you don't know why it is. This guy, you need to read his book. And you don't know why. Somebody got it wrong once. Well, getting it wrong these days isn't going to fly. It can't. It can't fly. It lends towards that sort of thing that says, hey, there's a bunch of updates happening when you shake somebody's hand spiritually, right? There's a bunch of interactions behind the scenes in the other dimensional. If we are multidimensional beings, and there is other kind of times that within 1 second we could be experiencing thousands of years in other dimensional. When we shake someone's hand, what's the interaction? Are those ones where when you shake somebody's hand, it's like, yo, what's going on, man? I'm just kind of chilling out, just doing my thing. Yeah, there's got to be things like that. But it's not meant to be awkward, but it is meant to say, hey, there is life being lived to a certain extent. Some people don't have to be forced to have to live life together in a certain manner. You looking at somebody shouldn't cause you to have to live life with them if there wasn't consent involved. That's one of those rights, and to a certain extent that is decent. With that being said, though, it's one of those things that in turbulent processes and processes that need updates in regards to others, like shaking the hand of a family member you haven't seen in a little bit, or things like that. What exactly, if there's no updates happening spiritually by way of facilitation and metaphoricals in regards to what the in front of the scenes dimensionals do, and then that interaction is not taking place, then that could be a difficulty that needs situating. For example, the utilization of names, the utilization of lives, people thinking that somebody's something that they're not in a certain manner, and not necessarily being able to interact with them in certain manners that some would have hoped to a certain extent. We need to be able to facilitate, some of those updates, to a certain extent, without having to rely upon in front of the scenes other dimensionals to make that interaction happening. The spirit needs to be able to facilitate in a certain manner, and the communications between those places that main spirit guides indicated and the lower thresholds that main spirit guides indicated needs to be maintained. This sort of stuff that's like, oh, well, it's just, it's like, crinkling of the, the wrapping paper, can't hear that cutting out, and then just hanging up is not cutting it anymore. It doesn't friggin' fly. I'm sorry, with all these situations, they're going to look towards that. I'm going to wonder, hey, was that comms guy who got put there just there to friggin' take the blame? I mean, heck, it can't be that, because his situation was probably like, listen, it could be a whole ton lot worse. Well, it's still kind of crap, though, at the end of it all, specifically when you moved on, etc. I mean, it's for guys you get called out for whatever the heck it was way back when. And I agree to a certain extent, but that's also it too. I mean, at what point is it that's just like, forget that life, go over here, and then, go harm some other people? Like, I mean, at what, like, there is a thing like that. And there is a disparity, because some people are like, hey, but it's the same thing. If he's not the same bad person that wanted to attack you in the past, then it's different. And it is to a certain extent, but it also does matter, specifically if you do it a certain kind of way. I mean, that would be why that was the case of this. Anyway, that's some of the interaction I think that was talked about. But one of the other things is, how can we facilitate body creation and atmospherics to be able to facilitate different kinds of interaction on this physical planet Earth to a certain extent? I mean, at what point and how can it help? I and others from Spirit Guides are advocating for the disclaimers in regards to the AJH Radio Free Earth to be displayed where Spirit Guides negated, the way Spirit Guides negated. I'm just going to read some of these small subject lines in regards to the disclaimers here. Main Camp's current information for what they chose for the AJH Radio Free Earth, July 8th, 2019. Information that Main Camp as well as other information that Main Camp takes priority how Main Camp in the light, the way Main Camp in the light. Malcolm says that Main Camp's Spirit Guides and others to Father Camp testify in regards to what Main Camp in regards to the AJH Radio Free Earth, July 8th, 2019. Information that Main Camp and others to Father Camp the way Main Camp needed. Malcolm says something Camp's Spirit Guides and others to Father Camp, as well as those that Main Camp are advocating for healing, protection, etc. to Father Camp in regards to the AJH Radio Free Earth. July 8th, 2019, information that Main Camp and others to Father Camp, the way Main Camp needed. I know there's Women's Guides are advocating for my dog Bogart. The Women's Guides need to be protected. Women's Guides need. I'm advocating for the home and hearth that Women's Guides need to be protected. And Women's Guides needed. Yeah. So I mean, that's some of the discussion points for this one. It's just a bit of a short one today. And yeah, carry on, people.